If we asked you where the foundations of mathematics or astronomy came from, you'd have a variety of answers. Perhaps ancient Greece, the Middle East even. But how many of you would say India? Well, many concepts which have transformed the modern world originated from ancient India. And although Indians have known this for a long time, it hasn't been widely documented in the West. But now, the historian and writer William Dalrymple has turned his attention to the subject in his latest book, The Golden Road, where he writes about how India is the forgotten heart of the ancient world. Well, I'm pleased to say that William joins me now in the studio. William, let me start by this. You've written multiple books about India. I've read many of them. Why haven't you written about
Delhi, Rajni?
Indeed. Why haven't you written about this sooner?
I've been writing for the last 20 years about British colonialism in India, particularly the East India Company, and I wrote a quartet of books, the Company Quartet, which I finished. And after 20 years, I'm ready for a change. So I've gone back 2,000 years, long before the colonial period, to the stuff that first brought me to India, in fact. These incredible caves of ancient India, the Buddhist caves of Ajanta and Ellora, the great stupas, these amazing sites from the very beginning of Indian history. Stuff that lured me to India in the first place and which I'm writing about for the first time now.
And this book is fascinating in what it uncovers. We mentioned some of that in the introduction about how a lot of today's world was shaped by ancient India. For example, the number 0.
Well, exactly. I mean, any primary school student anywhere in Britain will know names like Archimedes or Pythagoras. It's stuff that you learn when you're 7 or 8. But not many people in this country have the slightest awareness that the number system on every phone and every computer developed initially in India. And there's two particular figures totally unknown in the West, Brahmagupta and Aryabhatta, both of whom are completely common currency in India. Every primary student there learns about it. But somehow there's been a gap, and the great achievements of Indian science and mathematics are really completely unknown here.
And also you've written about music, for example, and other concepts as well. So how widespread does your book look into the influence of ancient India?
So, as far as the West is concerned, the number systems and 0 is the main Indian change here. But if you look at Asia, India was to ancient Asia really what Greece was to ancient Europe. When you go along the high street in Edinburgh or go along the Princes Street and see all these copies of the Acropolis, that was not because Greece conquered Scotland, but because Greek ideas were so extraordinary and so powerful that in the 18th century the Scots decided they would build their buildings in that style. In the same way, you see across the whole of Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and also in China, the influence not just of Indian gods, goddesses. The Buddha, of course, it's an Indian religion which conquered China, an extraordinary thought. And with it comes the language Sanskrit, and with Sanskrit comes Indian mathematics, Indian philosophy, Indian music, as you say, Indian drama, great epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. So when you go to the greatest and largest Hindu temple in the world, which is Angkor Wat in Cambodia, 5,000–6,000 miles away from India. The stories you see there are the epics first dreamt up around Delhi. So when you were living in Delhi, an hour north of there is the train station called Kurukshetra. Now that's the site of the great battle of the Mahabharata. But when you go to Angkor Wat in Southeast Asia, in the Mekong Delta, you see scenes of the battle of Kurukshetra on the walls of Angkor Wat. You see that repeated over that entire region. And in fact, half the world lives in areas that were once or are now entirely formed on the foundations of Indian religion and mythology.
And the question is, if you're saying that, I mean, it's a huge
chunk of the world.
A huge chunk of the world. If you're saying that, how come people in the West haven't really talked about this sooner?
There are many reasons for it, but partly, I think, and at the centre of it lies the old history of colonialism. As Macaulay said in his Minute of Education, a single shelf of good English books is worth the entire native literature of India and Arabia. So, what was the point of colonizing India if it was already a civilization of great sophistication and power? And so somehow there's still lingering echoes of that in our education system. So we learn about the Greeks, we learn about the Europeans, but we just don't learn about the great Indians of the past.
And just very briefly, I mean, India has a huge role in today's world. It's an economy that the UK is looking at doing a trade deal with. It's the largest population in the world now. It's had huge cultural influence. What do you think we can learn from ancient India when we look at today?
Well, I think India has always been this extraordinary presence in the globe. It's not just now. It's not as if it's some sort of strange freak of modern economics that India has overtaken Britain 2 or 3 years ago. And by the end of the century, it's going to be either India or America or China, which is the biggest economy in the world. Those are definitely going to be the top three. And this is not some surprise. This is not some weird happenstance. India and China, between them, have always been the two richest countries in the world for centuries. And the weird freak is this moment from about 1450, when Vasco da Gama goes to India and the colonial period begins. It ends in 1947 with the British leaving India. And what you're seeing is just the rebalancing of what has always been the normal economics of the world.
OK, fascinating stuff. William Dalrymple, your new book is called The Golden Road. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.